Ironically, the phrase embedded liberalism itself wasn't coined until 1982, which is shortly after the neoliberal revolution. It was first used by a scholar named John Gerard Ruggie in an analysis of the post-war economic order. However, Ruggie states that he himself borrowed the concept of embeddedness from Karl Polanyi, a Hungarian-American socialist philosopher. It is from Polanyi's major work, The Great Transformation from 1944, that the term embeddedness was taken to describe embedded liberalism. Polanyi's concept of embeddedness is much more nuanced than what we've discussed thus far. An understanding of Polanyi's writing informs us that, in fact, the transition from classical free market liberalism to embedded liberalism is just one phase of a cycle that has roots all the way back at the dawn of industrialization in England. Polanyi argues that until the turn of the 19th century, markets, wherever they existed, had always been embedded in society. They were subordinated by social relations, by religious institutions, by traditions of reciprocity, gift-giving, and redistribution of resources. Markets were means through which existing social relationships and norms were expressed, and were not ends in and of themselves. When industrialization rapidly emerged in England, classical English thinkers responded to its disruptions by crafting the very first theory of market liberalism, with the core belief that human society should be subordinated to self-regulating markets. These beliefs, that markets are self-regulating and exist outside of society, quickly spread across the world along with industrial capitalism itself. This was the moment in which the market ceased being embedded in society and for the first time in human history became an entity separate from society, to which society was meant to be subordinated. Polanyi identifies this moment as 1834, with the passage of legislation in England that created the very first markets for labor. From this point on, labor, land, and money were converted into commodities to be bought and sold at market prices. Polanyi calls these commodities fictitious, because he believed it was evident that these things, man, nature, and mediums of exchange, were obviously not created to be bought and sold on a market, and that commodifying these things would push both man and nature to the precipice of annihilation. An important part of Polanyi's stance is that attempting to completely disembed markets from society was harmful, but also impossible, a utopian project. Harmful because he believed human beings should never be commodified and subjected to the impersonal logic of a market, and impossible because society would inevitably protect itself, either consciously or unconsciously, from the dangers posed by self-regulating market societies. This urge of society to protect itself from the advancing march of the self-regulating market is what Polanyi called the double movement. In the Polanyian account, the catastrophes of the early 20th century that embedded liberalism was emerging from, the Great Depression and the World Wars, were violent expressions of the unconscious double movement reacting to the attempt to organize the global economy on the basis of disembedded markets anchored to the gold standard system. Polanyi saw World War I as the result of tensions between imperial powers rushing to colonize the world in competition for valuable natural resources that would make their home countries financially solvent under the rigid gold standard system. World War II was the moment that self-regulating markets and democracy both failed to protect society, allowing fascism to fill the void. In both cases, society underwent massive convulsions in the form of global conflicts and depressions as reactions to the disembedding of markets that had occurred 100 years earlier. The double movement is a powerful explanation for the rise of embedded liberalism. Once World War II had concluded, markets were, for the first time since 1834, after 111 years, re-embedded in society with the help of Keynesian economic policies. Keynesianism, in a way, was a recognition that there is no way the government can possibly abstain from the management of the fictitious commodities without incurring financial chaos and widespread human suffering. The double movement had successfully reverted markets to an embedded liberal position by legitimizing government intervention in the self-regulating market. The needs of humanity had finally begun to reassert themselves over the needs of the market. But this was a short-lived victory for defenders of society. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, markets were once again disembedded under the administrations of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, who represented the market forces at the opposite pole of the double movement. This is the period of neoliberalism, which is in fact the second period of market disembeddedness in human history, the period we are still living in today. Neoliberalism might have been a reaction against embedded liberalism, but the truth is that the feud that defines our times is not simply between the neoliberal version of capitalism and the embedded version of it. The truth is that the fundamental conflict at the heart of the neoliberal crisis is between the idea of a disembedded market, which is now protected by market-captured governments under neoliberalism, and the rest of human society. With Polanyi's concept of embeddedness in hand, the importance of Keynes is revealed to be not simply that he helped create embedded liberalism, but that he helped re-embed markets back into the fabric of human society, and remove the self-regulating market from a position of supremacy over humankind, if only temporarily. But there was another man who wanted to dominate economic thought like Keynes did, who stood in Keynes's shadow throughout the 40s, 50s, and 60s, slowly building the arsenal for his counter-revolution all the while. The origin of neoliberalism, of the reaction to Keynesian state intervention, and the real beginning of our story is found in the work of one man, Friedrich August von Hayek.